The tone of his voice was always nearly perfect. Nothing ever got lost in translation from his mind to yours. You might not have gotten it all, but it wasn't because you didn't hear him well, or because his voice had a distracting rasp or some overly smoothness. His voice, like a well-oiled machine, was designed for leaving words in people's heads. Nobody ever says, "Do you remember what Herman's voice sounded like?" First of all, I don't think anyone really can. But anyway, if they're anything like me, they never considered it. They probably just took it for granted. It was more like, "Do you remember what Herman was saying?" Your car takes you places. You don't dwell on the workings of the drive shaft. His voice always seemed to fit perfectly into the acoustics of the room. Always audible, no more, no less. His voice never left an aftertaste the way many voices do. The way I know my own voice does. And you should thank me for not having to listen to it. Mine is pure hell next to the guy who never put more air into an enunciation than he needed to. Something happens in Herman that I've never seen happen in anyone else. He combines this charming wise-assness and this twice as charming mellowness. Something that started out as slightly obnoxious becomes nearly unignorable because of his mellow, confident delivery. This is getting hard to explain, the more I try to say something about it. Why is it that you can always hear what Mr. Wonderful is saying from the other side of the room at a party? I've been struggling over this one, and this is all I've come up with. Over the years, I just got so used to hearing him speak that my ears tuned into him. My ears got tuned into him. And when you've been getting something good for a long time, you develop ways of finding it even when it's partially hidden. You get addicted, like you would to anything else. When you get a rush from something consistently, your body decides that it doesn't want to just say no to it. And this is, of course, for your mind also. And when it's something like Herman, most of the time you realize it's probably good for you. Herman's words are kind of like the miracle drug we've all been looking for but probably never found. It felt good because it sounded good, and it sounded good because it always delivered. In my case, it became a fix I grew to need, a healthy one. It's a bit intangible, as I'm sure you figured out from all my flailing attempts at describing it. But in a way, it's like music for me. It's something that sounds good and generally makes me feel good, but something that is just about impossible to describe in words. Herman's voice gives you the chance to feel a totally new kind of altered state. If you have any experience with drugs, you should appreciate this. It's one of the few drugs that actually does good things for your brain. And when your brain is getting better, your body gets better at the same time. You begin to think about other good things like exercise for the mind and the body. His voice is like a drug that you take with your ears or with your eyes when you're reading his words. And that's not to mention that you can always learn a little bit about what cool looks like just by watching Herman move around. It's a little like being on mushrooms, or so I'm told, if you don't kill me for the druggy analogy. All I'm saying is that when you're on mushrooms, your sensory intake always feels like it might be just a little more than you can handle. With just a regular person's level of, call it, emotional durability, it can be overwhelming. Herman can be overwhelming. That's all I was trying to say. There were lots of times when I wasn't sure I was going to walk away from my conversations with Herman still right in the head. In fact, I'm not sure I always did. It was always a strange feeling actually insane, and then getting the weird feeling afterwards that you might be a little better off for having lost your shit for a minute. Does that make any sense? You probably have to be considerably unstable to know what I'm really trying to say here. Don't blame yourself if you don't know what losing your shit feels like. You're not missing anything. Herman talks about feeling insane, but I know the feeling must have felt healthier than. But I know his feeling must have felt healthier than my version of it. Mine never felt particularly good. It's just that it usually ended when Herman left the room. It's just that it usually ended when Herman left the room. My feeling of insane. Only then would I have a chance to think about things and work through how unstable I felt. On good days, I could learn something from losing my shit for a while. And it wasn't always that I had to get rid of Herman to feel better. Sometimes having him around was just what I needed. Part of the reason I give him so much credit for my general well-being is because he proved to me time and time again that he could smooth things down for me. Sure, the more sense he made, the worse I felt sometimes. But I think, eventually, we learn that a lot of life is going to be about learning. We're not always going to be the most confident or smartest one in the room, the one calling all the shots or explaining everything. That's just not the way life works, and not the way the world works. If you don't know something naturally, like I generally don't, eventually you're forced to learn some humility. And yes, it can be a rather painful process, coming to terms with your own insignificance. As charming as Herman was, or is, as seemingly humble as he acted, I know he never had to deal with this kind of shit firsthand. Or at least not the way I have. The simplest way I can put it is that I've always had to deal with him, and he's always had to deal with me. Ours have not been identical lives. I'm basically like a regular person to deal with, and he's nothing like a regular person. I get to be the one and only Dave Horton, and Herman gets to be Captain effing America. Yippee! Let me first make it perfectly clear that this is his book and not mine. I'm just here to introduce him. Though if you think about it, he is the book, so it really doesn't matter. Yeah, this rock song of myself, as he calls it somewhere, story of the sentimentalist, is his records of his own life. And it was only just before the accident that I found out he'd been struggling to make a good story about it.